You weren't destroyed by your enemies. You were dismantled by the ones who smiled, by the ones who said, "I care," right before they took something from you, by those who praised your patience as they tested its limits. And when it hurt, you stayed quiet because that's what you were taught to do. You believed being good would protect you, that showing up, forgiving, explaining would one day be enough. But it wasn't. It only taught them one thing: you'd never leave. You weren't weak. You were predictable, too available, too readable. And in a world where attention is currency, you made yourself cheap. That's the bitter truth. The world doesn't respect the ones who are always there. It respects the ones who know how to leave without warning, without explanation, without fear. Machiavelli never told you to be cruel. He told you to be untouchable, unpredictable, unignorable. He warned, the kind-hearted, without boundaries, are not admired, they're consumed. And you kept showing up, even when it cost you everything. You thought your presence was love, but to them, it became background noise. So now you're here, not because you're soft, but because you've reached your limit, and something inside you, the part you've buried for years, is waking up. The silence you once used to avoid conflict is about to become your greatest weapon, because power doesn't live in kindness alone. It lives in the moment they feel your absence and flinch. There's a kind of pain no one ever talks about. It leaves no bruises. It doesn't scream. It doesn't bleed. It just waits. It's in the smile you fake when someone interrupts you again. In the way you say "I'm fine" while your chest tightens like a vice. It's the pause before you speak. The silence after they ignore you. The 1,000 quiet moments when you swallow your truth just to avoid making others uncomfortable. You didn't choose invisibility. You were trained into it. They called it being mature, easygoing, understanding. But what they really meant was, you're convenient. You don't make us deal with your humanity. So you stayed silent, smiling when you wanted to scream, giving when you were empty, apologizing for taking up space even when no one asked you to. And the worst part, they didn't even notice. Because pain like this doesn't collapse in public. It blends in. It wears your face. It picks up the phone, shows up early, stays late. And when it finally breaks, it does so in silence. You thought being low maintenance made you lovable? That if you made their lives easier, they'd hold on tighter. But all it did was train them to expect you without effort. You became predictable. And predictable people don't get protected. They get used. You never exploded. You never raised your voice. You just disappeared a little each day. Until one morning, you looked in the mirror and realized you weren't angry. You weren't broken. You were just fading. The death of the dependable isn't loud. It's slow. It's quiet. It's the erosion of someone who gave too much for too long without ever being asked how they were doing. But here's the part no one warns you about. You taught them. You trained them. Every time you stayed quiet. Every time you forgave without a consequence. Every time you made peace instead of making truth. You thought love would come if you just kept showing up, but it didn't. Because love that ignores your limits isn't love. It's consumption. It's convenience. It's control. Wearing a gentle face. And that little voice inside the one you've been shushing for years. It's getting louder. It's not asking anymore. It's warning you. Enough. Enough bleeding in silence. Enough shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Enough explaining pain to people who benefit from your confusion. Because something is changing now. Not in them. In you. You no longer want to be the one who always understands. You want to be understood without begging. You want space without justifying it. You want to be missed, not expected. And here's what happens when that shift begins. You stop answering texts that feel like traps. You stop saying it's okay when it's not. You stop softening your voice to avoid sounding too much. You stop handing out your presence like a free trial to people who never subscribed to your worth in the first place. And they'll notice. Not because you yell, not because you fight, but because you stop dancing around their comfort. Your silence becomes expensive. Your distance becomes a question, and your absence becomes the first time they realize they were never entitled to you. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, not because fear is power, but because fear means consequence. And consequence is what finally makes people reconsider how they treat you. So, no, you're not cruel. You're clear. You're done negotiating your worth in whispers. You're done training people to forget your fire. Because the version of you that was always available just died. And the one replacing it doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't return just because they finally noticed you were gone. If they keep crossing your boundaries, it's not always because they're cruel. It's because they were never shown they existed. Because you were never taught to build them. From the moment you could speak, you were praised for being agreeable, smiled at when you stayed quiet, rewarded for being easy, called mature when you swallowed pain without blinking. You didn't become soft by chance. You were shaped into it, sculpted by a culture that fears directness and punishes clarity. They trained you not to be strong. They trained you to be tolerable. You were taught to avoid tension, to bend, to be digestible, to give not with discernment, but with obedience. But here's the problem. When you become too easy to digest, people consume you without ever tasting your worth. They won't remember your patience. They won't cherish your silence. They'll just keep reaching for more because your lack of resistance tells them it's safe to take. This isn't just social. This is systemic. You learn the rules early. Don't speak too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't make others uncomfortable even when they're hurting you. This is not a personality trait. This is programming. You were taught that goodness means surrender. That value means being needed. That love means never causing conflict. And now, you walk into rooms like an apology. You speak not to express truth, but to avoid offense. You offer yourself in fragments, hoping someone will assemble you into something lovable. But Machiavelli knew better. Centuries ago, he wrote the line, "No one wants to admit today, men are quick to forget benefits, but slow to forget injuries. They don't remember your kindness. They remember your silence. They remember how easy it was to ignore you, how free your forgiveness came, how low the cost was to hurt you. Because we're not as evolved as we pretend. Behind suits and smartphones and pleasantries, we're still animals, drawn to strength, wired for hierarchy. And unconsciously, we test people not with cruelty, but with calculation. Can I take from them without paying a price? And if the answer is yes, they will. Not because they're evil, but because systems reward takers. Families, corporations, classrooms, they elevate the bold and forget the quiet givers. Look around. The loud get heard. The confident get chosen. The ruthless get respected because their standards make others uncomfortable. And the kind-hearted, they get told to wait, to be grateful, to keep giving, to be patient for recognition that never comes. This is not morality. This is machinery. And unless you break it, it will break you. That's why Machiavelli never preached purity. He preached perception. Power isn't about being loved. It's about being felt. It's about walking into a room and shifting the temperature without raising your voice. So, here's the shift. Stop begging to be understood in a system that only respects power. Start becoming unreadable. Start becoming undeniable. Start becoming unconsumable. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. You just need to stop handing out your peace like candy. Because when your presence is always available, your absence means nothing. But when you reclaim your energy, when your silence becomes deliberate, when your time feels expensive, when your gaze is no longer seeking approval, they feel it. Suddenly, they wonder, what changed? Why does the air feel different? And that's when the recalibration begins. Not because you demanded respect, but because you became the kind of person who no longer offers their essence for free. So if they keep crossing your boundaries, stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking what you've been tolerating too long. Because morality without strength becomes martyrdom, and patience without limits becomes a playground for the cruel. Machiavelli's harshest truth wasn't about war or politics. It was this. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. In other words, don't expect others to honor your kindness unless they feel the weight of disappointing you. So the next time someone wonders, do they like me? Make sure the better question is, do they fear losing me? You don't need to be cruel to lose respect. You just need to be too easy to reach, too always there, too quick to respond, too afraid to draw a line. Most people think invisibility happens when you stay quiet, but often it happens when you speak too much, show up too fast, give too soon, and suddenly you disappear, not because you shrank, but because they stopped seeing you. You thought your loyalty would earn you reverence, but it only taught them one thing. You'll show up, no matter how they treat you. That's not love. That's predictability. And predictable people are rarely protected. They're managed until they're no longer useful. Let's break this down. Mistake number 1, overexposure. You thought visibility meant value, so you kept showing up, texting first, checking in, explaining yourself in paragraphs, letting them know they're always on your mind. But Machiavelli warned a prince must learn to conceal his intentions. Why? Because the second someone can read your entire soul like an open book, they stop opening the pages. Mystery creates gravity. Predictability creates boredom. The most respected people, they're not constantly accessible. They're intentional with presence. And in doing so, they become rare. Reversal. You thought availability made you feel close. It only made your presence easier to take for granted. Mistake number 2, believing good intentions are enough. You meant well. You gave because you cared. You forgave because you valued peace. But here's the brutal truth. People don't respond to what you meant. They respond to how you made them feel about themselves. If your kindness made them feel safe, they'll admire you. If it made them feel guilty, they'll resent you. If it made them feel superior, they'll use you. Intention is invisible. Perception is everything. Reversal. You thought your sincerity would be understood. It wasn't, because you were speaking the language of loyalty to people fluent in convenience. Mistake number 3, giving before you're valued. You wanted to connect, to be trusted, to be chosen, so you gave first. Your time, your attention, your vulnerability, hoping they'd give back once they saw your heart. But humans don't work that way. We don't value what's free. We value what costs us something. Machiavelli understood this well. He never said don't give. He said give with strategy. Give when it builds trust, not when it buys hope. Reversal. You thought generosity would inspire reciprocity, but without standards. It just inspired entitlement. Mistake number 4. Avoiding conflict to preserve peace. You feared that drawing a boundary would push them away. So you stayed quiet, smiled through the tension, made excuses for their disrespect, chose comfort over confrontation again. But what you didn't realize is that every time you avoid a necessary conflict, you destroy the relationship just a little slower. Machiavelli would call that a betrayal. Not of them, of yourself. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because in the middle lies manipulation. Reversal. You thought silence was keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was keeping them comfortable with crossing your line. Now here's what most good people don't realize. The world doesn't honor invisible sacrifice. It forgets it. You think your endless patience makes you strong. But to them, it just means you'll never leave. You think being the bigger person makes you worthy. But they've learned you'll carry the weight of their mistakes too. You thought they'd finally see your value, but you were training them to look away. So here's your pivot point. Stop giving love as a strategy. Stop using kindness as currency. Stop offering loyalty without leverage. Make your silence mean something. Make your forgiveness conditional. Make your presence felt like a rare privilege, not a routine. Because the moment you stop offering the best of you to people who haven't earned it, is the moment they stop assuming it's theirs by default. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always come wrapped in muscles or medals. Sometimes it's quiet, cold, sharp like a blade hidden behind still eyes. You've been told your whole life that goodness would protect you, that if you gave enough, stayed soft enough, forgave often enough, they'd value you. But they didn't. Not because you weren't good, but because you were predictable. In a world driven by perception, what people can predict, they stop respecting. You made yourself easy to read, easy to reach, easy to use. You tried to be the light, but no one ever taught you the value of shadow, of boundaries, of consequence, because that's where power lives. Not in how much you love, but in what you'll never tolerate again. Not in how many chances you give, but in the weight of your silence when you're done. They told you to be kind, but they forgot to teach you how to be dangerous. Not to others, but to the systems that keep draining you. There is a version of you, buried beneath politeness, beneath self-doubt, beneath the need to be liked. And that version, it doesn't ask to be respected. It simply is. It walks into a room and changes the temperature without saying a word. It doesn't overshare. It doesn't explain. It doesn't flinch when someone questions its worth. Because it's no longer trying to be understood. It's done performing for approval. See, real power isn't about domination. It's about ownership of your mind, your time, your voice. And to own those things, you'll need to reclaim parts of yourself. You were told to hide your anger, not as rage, but as boundary. Your silence, not as fear, but as consequence. Your solitude, not as emptiness, but as self-respect. The people who rise in this world aren't always the kindest. They're the clearest. The ones who know how to hold their energy. The ones who don't explain their distance, they embody it. Because when you're calm and unreadable and still undeniably felt, you stop being an option. You start being a presence. So if you're tired of being overlooked, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you haven't let them feel what it means to lose you. And maybe now, you finally understand. It's not about being feared or loved. It's about being respected. And respect doesn't come from softness. It comes from clarity, from weight, from becoming someone they can no longer afford to misunderstand. Change never begins in the hands. It starts in the mind. In that small, quiet voice that finally dares to ask, what if I've been wrong about everything I thought made me worthy? You believed if you were kind enough, calm enough, patient enough, they'd see your heart. But they didn't. Because worth isn't proven by how much you give. It's revealed by what you refuse to tolerate. You weren't overlooked because you were weak. You were overlooked because you were too available to be noticed, too soft to be feared, too forgiving to be felt. They didn't see your value because you trained them not to. That's the hardest truth to swallow. Every it's okay when it wasn't. Every smile to keep the peace. Every second chance you handed out without earning one back was a lesson. You taught them your silence had no consequence. Your love had no boundary. And your presence had no price. But here's the shift. You stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I like who I become around them? You stop begging to stay and start deciding who deserves access at all. You stop seeing rejection as failure. You start seeing it as filtering. Because now, your peace costs something. Your time isn't on clearance. Your love isn't a discount. You don't give because you're afraid to lose people. You give because someone proved they're safe to receive it. And if they're not, you walk calmly, quietly, without slamming doors, without leaving notes. You just disappear. Because the new you doesn't need closure. The new you is the closure. That's what happens when clarity replaces desperation. You stop auditioning for roles in stories that shrink you. You stop solving red flags like puzzles. You stop translating disrespect into maybe they're just hurting. You stop explaining your standards like they're a crime. And suddenly, they notice the silence. They feel your absence. They replay every moment trying to find the one where they lost access to you. And you don't even look back. Because this is what strength looks like now. Not louder, not meaner, just unavailable to what once drained you. Philosophy means nothing if it never touches your spine. Knowing isn't enough. Power has to be lived. So here's how it begins. Stop over-explaining. You don't owe anyone your reasons. Let your no stand without decoration. Let your silence say what your words use to beg for. Next time someone asks, why didn't you reply? Let the pause answer for you. Let the quiet feel heavier than any explanation ever could. Make your words expensive. Don't speak to be liked. Speak to be felt. Every word should cost something. Every pause should carry tension. You don't need to talk more. You need to talk less and mean more. When you speak, let it shift the room. Control your body before the room. Power walks slowly. Power doesn't fidget. Power holds eye contact. 1 second longer than comfort allows. Your presence should say, I don't need to prove anything. I just am. Because the body speaks before the mouth. Make sure it speaks with stillness. Not desperation. Disengage without drama. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every battle needs your fire. When they test you, don't react. Don't explain. Don't justify. Just finish. Quietly. Fully. Let the silence choke them. They won't remember what you said. They'll remember that you said nothing and never returned. Raise the price of access. Your time is not cheap. Your peace is not public property. Your heart is not a donation box. Before you let someone in, ask, do they bring clarity or chaos? Respect or excuses? Because if they cost you your peace, they were too expensive from the start. Luke, give like a strategist, not a savior. Giving isn't weakness. But giving without discernment is dangerous. Don't give to prove you're good. Give to reward what's proven to be loyal. Give from fullness, not from fear. If there's no overflow, wait. Sometimes, silence is the most generous thing you can offer. Here's the truth no one wants to say. You don't need to fight. You don't need to threaten. You don't even need to speak. You just need to disappear from where you're disrespected. And when you return, if you do, make sure it's not out of guilt. Make sure it's because they've changed, or you've outgrown needing them to. Because real power, it's not in what you control. It's in what no longer controls you. Strength doesn't look the way it used to. It's not raised voices, not fists on the table, not yelling to be heard. Real strength is quieter now. It walks in and changes the air. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't need to be understood to be felt. This kind of strength doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It doesn't perform softness to stay accepted. It just exists, fully, unapologetically, undeniably. They used to ignore your boundaries. Now they hesitate before speaking. They used to forget your value. Now they flinch in your absence. You don't need to convince them anymore. You just leave and let silence do what words never could. Not because you're cruel, but because you're done. You've forgiven things that should have been remembered. You've stayed when you should have walked. You've swallowed shame like water and called it grace. But not anymore. Now, your silence isn't fear. It's consequence. Now, your gaze isn't pleading. It's discerning. Now, your absence isn't rejection. It's a message access denied. This is the new face of strength. A man who no longer raises his voice because his presence already speaks. A woman who no longer explains because her silence now draws lines they won't dare cross. A soul who no longer fears solitude because solitude has become sacred. They don't slam doors. They don't send long texts. They don't ask for closure. They just vanish. And the world adjusts, because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone they can no longer read. No longer bent. No longer reach. You used to be available. Now, you are rare. You used to overgive. Now, you offer nothing that isn't earned. And they feel it. In the space you once filled. In the calm you once offered. In the warmth they took for granted. You don't want revenge. You want silence. You want peace without having to bleed for it. And now, you have it. Because love without self-respect isn't love. It's dependency. Kindness without consequence isn't kindness. It's permission. And forgiveness without standards isn't healing. It's self-erasure. So, if your heart is beating slower now, if your mind feels heavier, that's not fear. That's memory. That's the version of you waking up. The one who stopped apologizing. The one who doesn't need to be saved, only remembered. Because from now on, you're not the one who stays. You're the one they regret losing. You weren't weak. You were just unguarded. You weren't invisible. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see anyone they didn't control. You weren't too much. You were just in the wrong rooms, trying to stay small enough to be held. But that version of you, the one who kept bleeding quietly, for people who never even asked if you were okay, is done. You no longer soften to be chosen. You no longer explain to be understood. You no longer stay, just because they noticed you're gone. From this moment forward, you will not trade your dignity for connection. You will not lower your standards to avoid being alone. You will not apologize for the cost of access to your life, because your peace is expensive. Your silence is heavy. Your love is sacred. And your absence will be felt like a door closing slowly, with no explanation. They didn't hate you. They just never feared losing you. And that is what changes now. Let them adjust to your distance. Let them wonder what happened. Let them replay the silence again and again. Because the new you doesn't need applause, doesn't need validation, doesn't need to be invited back in. You are the invitation. You are the standard. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be remembered. In your absence, this isn't a performance anymore. This is a declaration. You are no longer accessible. You are no longer explainable. You are no longer bendable. You are sovereign. And from this point on, the world either respects that or gets replaced by it.